de 5000 tonnes, un marché d'intrants cotant de plus de 60 milliards de francs CFA par campagne agricole, plus du quart de la production mondiale et près de la moitié de l'offre mondiale de noix brutes de cajou, un immense potentiel de création d'emplois et de richesses.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are, and welcome once again
Recording
to the
in
Global Markets
progress.
Encounter with Jim Fitzpatrick. As usual, we continue with the 2022 crop and markets. And today we will also be hearing from Serge Bonu of Tularo Global in Benin, and then also Evelyn Obidike, Director, NEPC, who will be introduced later by Jim Fitzpatrick and will then be part of a further discussion with Jim. Also remember that we are coming your way in the English language, but with simultaneous translation in French. So please use the button at the bottom of the screen to select the language of your choice. I see Jim is on, and but before I allow Jim to take the floor, let me also mention that we are coming to you on Facebook Live and also on YouTube. At this stage, I would also like to acknowledge those who have made this possible and continue to support us. And here I'm talking about the GIZ.com Cashew, which is now the MOVE project. So GIZ MOVE, CNFA Pro Cashew, TechnoServe Benin Cashew, SNI, MEA, CMA CGM, Intersnack Procurement, and Mekong. At this stage, Jim Fitzpatrick, you need no introduction. Please, the floor is yours, and you may take us through today's session. Thank you very much.
Morning, Ernest.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. I hope you're all keeping well. We're going to talk today about some of our typical topics, and we're probably going to get into a little bit into the numbers on prices to have a look and to try and understand the market a little bit. So we'll start off with a look at harvest updates and the latest production situation from our point of view, naturally, particularly focused on West Africa. Then we'll have a look at, well, just what I'm calling trying to understand the market. It's not easy to understand the market at the moment, given the low prices of kernels in some areas and the high price of raw nuts by comparison. So we'll try and make some sense of that. And we'll look at previous years and the current price levels, particularly, to try and give us some clues. We have two interesting guests today, as Ernest has mentioned. Welcome to Serge, welcome to Evelyn, and we will come back to you a little later after we've talked about markets. As usual, let me invite everyone to ask questions, make comments, participate. It's always great to hear from you, and if you have questions, we will do our best to answer those. So let's start by having a look at Asian production. What we can now say the three big producers in Asia: Vietnam, Cambodia, and India. So looking first of all at the biggest producer. And the position in India is that in 2022, most people are expecting that Indian demand, which was interrupted by the pandemic, will return to its normal pattern. So far, that's been happening quite slowly. But what we are seeing is the earlier predictions, and if you were with us the last time, you will have heard that, the predictions that with so many events, particularly family events, postponed, that we will see an upsurge in consumption. Always remember, if you're not familiar with the Indian cashew market, cashews are an important part of Indian festivals, Indian society, and the product is used in many, many different applications on many, many different occasions. But back to the big picture of the market, the crop forecast in India remains in this range, 750 to 775,000 tons. But there are some question marks over certain important producing states at the moment, particularly in the western part of India. The opening stocks in India were low. Imports this year are slightly up, but nothing particularly noticeable. They are starting quite healthily. I think what's the really most notable factor from an Indian processor's point of view is that time is beginning to get tight, time to make decisions. So we have seen Indian buyers a little bit active in the market, much more so than Vietnamese in recent weeks. And in a moment, we'll also have a closer look at India, and we'll have a look at the currency factor and the influence that the strength or weakness of the Indian rupee against the dollar can have on the market. So turning to Cambodia, it's been for a long time a little bit of an enigma, the Cambodian cashew sector. We know it's growing very quickly. I've been lucky enough to spend a fair bit of time in Cambodia, and I've worked with the cashew sector there, amongst others. Generally speaking, what we're getting is a picture from a range of local sources that the crop is lower by about 10 to 30%, depending on who you talk to and where they are. Early season exports are down. If you look at the Vietnamese import figures, you'll see that the figures compared to last year are down. Now, when we get to March, it's going to be very difficult to make comparisons on the figures because, as you know, last year from March onwards, there was a major distortion in the trade figures between Cambodia and Vietnam. There was an incredible figure of 700,000 tons mentioned during March last year. So from here on in, comparisons are going to be difficult, and we need to be very careful how we treat those figures. So far, we can say that January, February exports from Cambodia have been down a little bit, and that probably reflects the crop situation, and possibly also that the crop is a little bit later than normal. Prices, as you'd expect in that environment, prices at the farm gate are relatively steady. Cambodian raw cashew nuts are high quality. Many of them are very large nuts, relatively high yielding. They're generally not dried on the farm, and in many cases, they're not dried until they're exported. But looking at the map, you can see that Cambodia delivery into Vietnam is a matter of a couple of days transit at the very most. Looking to Vietnam, this crop is now at its peak. I understand that the quality is a little bit lower than usual. Again, Vietnamese raw cashew nuts are often of very good quality. The farm gate price looks high by African standards for sure, but it is a little bit lower than in recent years. In Vietnam, the imports are down on last year. But let's not forget that last year was a very high year for imports. And even though it's lower than last year, it's still the second highest January-February period on record. So we're seeing a situation where there are definitely forecasts of lower crops than expected in Cambodia, a lower crop than last year in Vietnam, and some question mark over the Indian crop. I'm still going to stick in my own figures with the official estimates, but that situation would need to be watched clearly. And the fact is, we probably won't know for some months really what the Indian crop is. It's a huge crop harvested over a huge area. So there are question marks over production in Asia, but no question mark that would really cause us to even consider ideas of shortage or even a supply squeeze in the longer run. Let's turn our attention to the largest producing region in the world, in West Africa. And we have guests from Nigeria and Benin today, so we'll come to them later and maybe get some up-to-date and some good information on what's going on in those sectors. But first of all, Nigeria forecasts now are below 200,000 tons. Exports are slow. Farm gate prices are quite high in Nigeria, according to the African Cashew Alliance correspondence there. Quality is good. Looking in Benin, again, the official launch of the season has been delayed. The original crop estimate, some 200,000 tons estimate, which I think, as you know, if you joined us previously, I always thought was a little bit high. It looks like this is going to be much more like the kind of crop that was produced last year in the end. Farm gate prices relatively high. I'm told quality is good in some areas, but generally speaking, quality is not as good as hoped for. Now, that may change as the crop develops, but there has to be a concern, similar to Nigeria, that the impact of the weather during the flowering season has reduced the Benin crop and possibly may reduce the quality, but that remains to be seen. However, in the international market, there's no clue that the quality may have been reduced. Sellers are still asking prices in the range 1360, 1350, up to 1400. Those are sellers asking prices, not trades, at least not trades that I've heard. So again, you have coming to the end of March, you still have a rather unclear position in Nigeria and Benin. And that's unusual. Normally by this stage, Indian buyers would be highly active in Benin and product would be moving really as quickly as possible. As you know, Benin raw cashew nuts are favored in India for many reasons. Quality, outturn, taste. It's a really good product. And if it's lost, it will have mainly an impact on Indian buyers. Looking at Ghana, the second crop is underway. Initial reports on the first crop were that it was quite poor in quality and size. Prices went really very high. Prices were up around 650 cities at one time. The minimum price is 5, just to give you an idea. And that would be a high price. Of course, Ghana exports a lot more than Ghanaian raw cashew nuts. And we are seeing now raw cashew nuts from neighboring countries pour into Ghana for export. Although perhaps this year, not as many from Cote d'Ivoire as we might usually see. But certainly other countries north of Ghana would certainly have to, in any case, ship down through Ghanaian ports. Ghana also is important for Indian buyers. So most Ghanaian raw cashew nuts go to India. So delays or problems in Ghana and Benin has a bigger effect on Indian buyers than it would on Vietnamese buyers, for example. Looking at Togo, reports from ACA correspondents there tell us that they're very good crop forecast this year. Good quality. It looks good. There's quite a lot of organic cashews also in Togo, which are trading well. And this situation looks pretty healthy this year. The big producer in West Africa is Cote d'Ivoire with over 1 million tons. Earlier, outlook was during the first crop was not particularly positive. Quality was a little bit lower. Prices moved up at the farm gate as a result. That's changed a little bit. The recent rains, which would be normal and would be expected, but had perhaps been a little bit later than normal. Recent rains have improved the outlook for the second crop in particular. Farm gate prices have drifted back. Farm gate prices had reached around 400 CFA, and they're drifting back now to around about 350. I think that the crop, on what we know at this point, and again, this is a huge area, many different regions, it's difficult to forecast, but I think on what we know at the moment, that perhaps the crop won't make the 1.04 million tons of last year, but it's by no means a poor crop on what we know at the moment. Quality has been holding. There is the usual problem, which we see in a lot of countries, when farmers see prices rising, they hold on to the raw nuts and the quality can decline a little bit due to poor quality storage, but that's a factor, in fact, almost in every cashew country, that the post-harvest infrastructure doesn't really meet the needs of perfect, ideal quality raw cashew nuts for processors. At the moment, the export trade has not been particularly active. there is an absence of Vietnamese buyers, particularly the very large Vietnamese buyers. So we're seeing smaller deals. We're seeing the major export co-op not as active as usual. And we might expect that in that situation that prices would have drifted down, but they haven't. Prices, and we're going to have a look at this a little bit later, prices for export have not drifted down. They're holding pretty steady. If we look at Burkina Faso, in the week, we've got some not so good news. For the first time, we see people talking about a lower crop. We're seeing again the same problem of impact of the weather during the flowering period. And certainly there are some security concerns coming to the fore now in Burkina Faso in the Cashew area. We hear prices at the farm gate, as you can see on the screen, around $870, well, exactly $876 per ton. But I must say I'm treating that with a little bit of caution. It seems a very high price given the quality and given the options in the market at the moment. Mali too has a question mark over it. The security situation, the trade embargo is having an impact. It has been reported to us that about 24,000 tons has been exported. Of course, it's always across land borders into Burkina, into Guinea in particular. Farm gate prices ruling quite high. Generally looking at a situation where Mali may expect, perhaps not too much lower crop, but may expect to trade and export less quantity this year than would normally be expected. A rather difficult situation there, and a situation which is quite volatile too. And finally, we look at Guinea, where the crop is coming in. Reports are of good quality. Now, Guinea is not just cashews grown in Guinea, it's cashews coming in from the surrounding countries. You can see in the map on the screen, the red arrows indicate trade, what we might call illegal or informal trade, and the black arrows indicate trade, which is normal and legal. So in that context, we're seeing surprisingly high prices reported in Guinea for the early part of the season. So overall in West Africa, we're looking at quite a mixed picture. The situation in the more easterly regions is not as positive as in the West. And if we just mention the reports from Senegal, Guinea-Bissau and the Gambia, which we won't see any real harvesting there till mid-April. Reports from there remain quite good, and we would expect quite a good crop in the western area. But let's not forget that most of the volume is focused on Côte d'Ivoire and the area Ghana, Benin, Nigeria. So this is important to recognize. In the westerly area, it's really only Guinea-Bissau which could be described as a major producer. So let's have a look at the big picture in West Africa, and let's just consider for a moment the trend in cashew production there. So you can see I've picked on 5 major producing countries, and generally the trend has been positive. As you know, Côte d'Ivoire has been growing quickly. This year, perhaps, we might see that slightly interrupted. Now, we're not talking by any means about a major crop problem. We're just talking about a slightly lower crop. You know the way I do it, I have the historical, and then I have a current year low estimate and the current year high estimate. If the low estimate, which would be dependent on good weather during the second harvest and dependent on good growing conditions for the next 3 or 4 weeks, the harvest would be low but bigger than the 2020 crop. At the high estimate, you're looking at around about 1 million tons, getting close to 2020. Now, of course, we should always remember at this time of year, as we reach the end of March, estimates on crops almost anywhere in the cashew business are not particularly scientific. What we're talking about is gathering information from stakeholders in each country and putting that together, making a comparison and seeing how that looks against previous years. If we are looking for scientific estimates, we probably have to wait a little bit longer, probably toward the middle of the year, in fact, before we get anything that's realistic estimates. But I suppose the key factor here is what will happen in Côte d'Ivoire. Will that crop be lower or not? Elsewhere, I think we can probably say with some degree of accuracy now that the Nigerian crop is going to be lower than expected. Ghana looks fine. Benin, I'm still thinking about Benin around about the same level as last year. And Guinea-Bissau, I think we will see, given the reports, a crop at least as good as last year's crop from the recent reports. And we hope in the coming weeks we'll have some guests from the western part of the region that can give us a little bit of a better picture. Let's have a look at the overall trend in West Africa. It looks as if this year that the upward trend in production will be maintained. There are a number of questions around that. What's happening in Benin? What is the weather in Côte d'Ivoire? The political situation in Mali and how that might impact the export and handling of raw cashew nuts, and Guinea-Bissau. There are some really high estimates of production in Guinea-Bissau, and that could be interesting, but it should always be looked at with this question mark about shipment and management of the market, because there's definitely likely to be issues on freight and issues on shipping this year. And that's really what's happened in the last 3 years. We've a much longer season. It takes much longer to get RCN out, shipped, and to processors than in the past. And that's because mainly of more pressure on the ports, and in the last 2 years because of disruption to freight, particularly lack of availability, containers, vessels, and long voyage times. So these are factors which need to be taken into account. What's the impact of that on the world situation? Well, by our estimates, we're at best looking at a crop which is slightly better than last year's crop. That would make it a record crop. The low end, still a better crop than 2020. So generally speaking, when we look at the production situation, we're looking at a lower crop in Vietnam. We talk about it a lot, but Vietnam is a relatively small grower of cashew nuts. It's a huge processor, but a relatively small grower. And what we're seeing is a return to a better crop in India. And India, Côte d'Ivoire, and then countries like Guinea-Bissau and Ghana adding to production. That means that, again, we're looking at a fairly steady trend. Now, we need to be careful when we talk about the impact of these fundamentals on the market. Generally speaking, the cashew market tends to ignore the fundamentals, and the actual facts of production will only impact the market in the second half of the year, whether that's high production or low production. As we look at the current situation, we do need production to increase every year because consumption is going in the right direction. And one of the key things that we need to take into account when we look at cashews is not to mix up short-term phenomenon, short-term lack of parity. You'll often hear that phrase used for processors, with the long-term trends. And the long-term trend is that demand is rising quickly in almost all countries where cashew nuts are consumed, but production is not rising at the same pace. And it is difficult in that view to reconcile the current low prices, particularly from Vietnamese exporters, where cashew prices remain at 10-year lows and have done over the last 4 or 5 months. So we'll have a look now at the situation in terms of the raw cashew nut buyers. So these are the Indian and Vietnamese buyers, processors, traders, buyers of raw cashew nuts. And we'll try and have a look at what's happening in each of those countries to try and help us understand the current high prices for raw cashew nuts and low prices for cashew kernels. So at the moment in Vietnam, as I said, the crop is at its peak. Processors are naturally busy buying the domestic production, and of course they're buying Cambodian production. Prices have been relatively low since October. That means sub $3 a pound. They're currently around $2.80 from the lowest, which means probably that a lot of the forward sales are at relatively low prices. This means that Vietnamese processors would be exposed to any sharp rise in raw cashew nut prices. Import situation is lower than last year, but by no means critical. The Jan-Feb situation was good compared to any other year except 2021, and March has started well. Inventories of raw cashew nuts in Vietnam are relatively high, but they have been relatively high before. In recent years, we've seen heavy import of Tanzanian raw nuts, for example, leading to quite a high inventory position at the start of the season. Some of the raw nuts in store would be of lower quality. Some of them, according to some processors that I've spoken to, some of them would be of really poor quality, and that's a concern. But generally speaking, one of the reasons why Vietnamese traders and buyers may be out of the market is because they're holding a certain amount of inventory which they would like to clear. And if it is of lower quality, it's really pointless to bring in a lot of superior quality material because the low quality material will not move. If we look at the kernels prices are low, as I've mentioned, and exports are down on last year. Again, if you compare with last year, they're down. If you compare with any other year, they look quite healthy. So I'm talking about exports now to the end of February. So looking at the current situation, in March, it seems to me that there are more than fundamental issues at play in the organization of the Vietnamese import of raw cashew nuts. It seems to me that there are issues with some of the trading companies, maybe changes of strategy, maybe enforced changes of strategy, and there are certainly, in many cases, issues of finance. I'm going to give you a guess as to why that might be in a moment. Overall, if we look at the production, going back to the fundamentals, the domestic consumption plus Cambodia will be about the same as last year. Vietnam will be lower. Cambodia will be lower than expected, but Cambodia has a lot of new trees coming online. So the crop there is by no means a poor crop. Well, we would have to say that generally speaking, that production between those two countries is below expectations. People would have expected a really large crop in Cambodia this year as more and more trees came online. And that looks like it's probably not going to happen. Some people were talking about 500,000 tons. Others were talking more than that. The crop could be somewhere between 400, 450, 375, 450 in that range, according to what we're hearing. And prices at the moment do seem to confirm that. So from that point of view, on the one hand, Vietnamese RCN buyers have inventory that they know about, although they may not be particularly happy about it. They have the domestic crop, they have the Cambodian crop, and they have imports coming in. It actually doesn't look like an imbalanced situation, either in terms of supply or in terms of any kind of shortage. Why kernels prices are so low is very difficult to explain just on the basis of what we know in Vietnam. Let's focus on India for a moment. Indian situation is different. We have a good crop forecast, but the crop in some of the West Coast states is not as good as hoped for or as expected due to growing conditions. This may be related to very hot weather. This may affect cashews or it may not. If the very hot weather in a lot of cases came after the cashews had flowered, but in others it may have an impact. So the question, as I was mentioning earlier, there is still a question mark over Indian production. Demand is beginning to pick up. So that the pickup in demand means that really time is not on the side of the Indian processors. They probably need to make decisions now, and that's based on a low carry-in stock. Naturally enough, given reduced demand in the last 2 years, that's not surprising. Low carry-in stock, a return to good demand as expected. Major factors determining the difficulty for Indian buyers in making decisions. And they're looking at the absence of Benin raw cashew nuts from the market at the moment. They're looking at the Ghanaian crop at relatively high prices. So whereas Indian processors in general, they have a higher cost of processing, they have a higher kernels market domestically. So you would have thought that they would be in quite a good position to trade profitably, but it has become quite a tight calculation for them. I'm not saying that they're necessarily in a loss-making position like so many export processors in other countries, but they are looking very carefully at this. And they're also looking at the currency. So this is the Indian rupee against the US dollar. So you will see that the rupee is lower than it was this time last year. Now, it's a critical thing to consider with India. Bear in mind that India is a major net importer of cashew nuts. If we look at Vietnam's situation, they buy raw cashew nuts, mostly in West Africa. They transform them to kernels and they re-export them. The purchase and the sale, generally speaking, are in US dollars. In India, the purchase of imported, and India imports about 55% of its raw cashew nuts. The purchase of imported is almost always in US dollars, and the sale in the domestic market is generally speaking in Indian rupees. A decline in the value of the rupee therefore affects the price they can pay for imported raw cashew nuts. So we've seen the rupee decline gently over the year, but if we look at the situation in recent months, January, February, March, it's been quite a sharp decline. Having strengthened, it's declined again. Now, there is a seasonal element to that, for sure, but one thing seems to me that in the psychology of a buyer, if they see this kind of uncertainty, they're more likely to stand back from the market and take their time. And I think that's what's happening. And the question now is, how much time have they got? So what we're seeing is prices of raw cashew nuts relatively stable. We're seeing prices of kernels, again, relatively stable, but at low levels, especially in Vietnam, but also in India. Quite a deal of uncertainty due to these factors. And buyers, as a result, taking their time. And when they take their time, you'd expect that prices would fall, but they've not fallen. And kernels prices probably have fallen to levels at which they cannot fall any further. And raw cashew nuts prices are relatively stable. And looking at the market today, there is no clue that those are going to drift lower. So let's have a look at prices, bearing in mind that this situation, especially in India, at the moment is about time, the time taken to get the raw nuts to market, the time needed to assemble and process the stock, and money, the price paid for it, and the price that can be realized, always influenced in the Indian situation by the value of the currency. So let's have a look at some of the numbers around prices. And we'll do this in a slightly different way than the way we've done it in the past. But first of all, let's just position ourselves in terms of where are 320 prices. We do this regularly, as you know, if you've joined us before. And we're just going to place this current market in the historical context. So right now, we're in a position where The lowest priced origin, Vietnam, is down here at prices that we've only seen in the last 10 years during the early days of the pandemic, when essentially we were looking at panic in the market. We're well below any kind of averages. We're well below the 2-year average. We're very far below the 5-year average. And the market, generally speaking, is around about 10-year lows. We're talking 320s, of course. Last time this happened, we saw a sharp increase in price. That came during April, May, and to a certain extent into June of 2020. It happened a little bit more quickly in 2021. At the moment, looking at the market, if you walked into today and started to talk about the cashew market, you would feel these prices will never change. The way it's spoken about, the way the trade volumes is, you'd look at this and you think, well, that's the price and that's the way it stays. But if we look at it historically, it is very volatile and it can change very quickly. And this is when we talk about time and money, we need to think about particularly how quickly the market can change. African cashew 320s, which I've just been tracking since last year, because prior to that, they were in or around about the same price, maybe slightly lower than Vietnamese. They continued to maintain a premium. Now, that's not just explained by lower freight rates. There are a number of factors at play on higher prices for West African cashew kernels. Certainly the freight is an element of that, but there are also other aspects like the quality of the kernels, the proximity of West African processors to the market, to markets in Europe and North America, the interest of buyers to diversify their sources of supply, and factors such as traceability, impact. All of these are factors which are coming into play to influence buyers' decisions and buyers' interest in West African cashew nuts. This is not just about a freight differential, and therefore it's not something that's likely to disappear anytime soon. If we look at the number of European buyers in particular visiting West Africa during March and planning visits in April and May, I don't think I've ever seen as many from as far up the chain visiting. We have people who are in processing, distribution, not just importers and roasters. So this is definitely marking a change, and that's the reason why African 320s continue to make premium prices over Vietnamese. Let's have a quick look at the RCN situation. Again, the market is relatively steady. We look at prices did dip a little bit earlier in the year, but that's recovered and we see relatively steady prices throughout the year. We're back at levels where we were about a year ago. There's nothing particularly remarkable. I suppose the only thing I'd remark on is the lack of volatility, that there has been relatively light trade and still exporters and traders are maintaining their offers at levels. Now, can that continue? What's the influence of kernels prices on that? So we put together an exercise, and now we're going to get into some numbers. And if you don't like numbers, well, you might not find this so interesting, but I think it shows us a few things about the current situation. So if we look at the price of RCN, so I've taken the export cost and freight price of Ivorian RCN basis £48, 19, 20, 21, 22. The same thing for Benin and the same thing for Ghana. And what we see is that relatively speaking, there's nothing unusual about prices at the moment. Benin material is a little bit higher in price, but then again, it's not actually trading. So whether that's a real market or not remains to be seen. Ivorian 2022, 2021, back to 19, around about the same price. There was a dip. Prices were much lower at this period in March 2020, but you know what happened then. the pandemic dawned on the world. If we look at prices for Ghanaian material, pretty similar situation. So what we're saying is that raw cashew nut prices over the past 4 years, with the exception of that period in March 2020, pretty much represent reasonable value. There's nothing particularly unusual about prices at the moment. If we look at the comparison of raw cashew nuts prices, and again, I've taken March, April 19, March, April 20, 2021 to try and draw some comparison. And here we have farm gate prices in Cote d'Ivoire. I've taken £47 as the benchmark. Farm gate prices in Vietnam, I've taken £50. Having said that, quality this year may be a little bit below that. And we're looking at international custom freight prices of RCN. First of all, we look at it and we say, again, prices are not particularly high at the moment, a little bit lower than at times last year in the international market. Farm gate prices in Vietnam are lower than last year. They're lower than the year before. Farm gate prices in Cote d'Ivoire as a representative origin in West Africa, higher than last March, higher than the March before, but around about the same level as March 2019. What is a little bit different when we look at this is here. When we look at the grey, which is RCN cost and freight. So this is Ivorian raw cashew nuts, cost and freight, Vietnam. And this is the comparison. I take Vietnam because we're primarily concerned with the international price of cashew kernels, which is effectively set in Vietnam. If we were to do the analysis for India, I know a lot of Indian stakeholders listen to this encounter. If we looked at India, we'd be looking at a completely different situation because Indian prices are much higher on kernels. But this factor here, where the imported price of raw cashew nuts is higher than the farm gate price in Vietnam, that's something we need to keep an eye on. Let's look at the trend. March 2020, we saw raw cashew nut prices at the farm gate in Cote d'Ivoire rise. We saw a similar situation in 2021. In 2020, international prices for raw cashew nuts actually fell while farm gate prices were rising. The key thing that's a little bit different this year, even though we've had relatively stable RCN prices in the last 2 years, raw cashew nuts have been holding their value. The farm gate price in West Africa is much lower than in Vietnam. And that's to do with quality, but mostly it's to do with location. Most of those raw cashew nuts have to be moved at the moment to Asia. And that's why farm gate prices are so much lower. If we look at this factor here, the cost gap between domestic Vietnamese or Cambodian raw cashew nuts and imported raw cashew nuts, that's wider than in any other month that we've chosen in the snapshot. It's wider on the high end. So imported raw cashew nuts have never been higher than farm gate raw cashew nuts over the 4 years that we're looking at. And that makes a difference. So this situation would naturally discourage Vietnamese buyers, particularly given that they have some inventory, discourage Vietnamese buyers from entering the international market. It also means that the farm gate prices in West Africa should be an encouragement for processors so that local processors have a distinct cost advantage. The big question for them is, can they get their processing cost, their actual on-cost, operating cost of processing under control to compete? And as we can see, they have a big gap in terms of competition. If this situation continues, the logical conclusion would be more factories built in West Africa, fewer factories in Vietnam. that kind of rationalization is likely unless we see something happen like a collapse in the farm gate in West Africa. And we're not going to see that while we've got minimum prices in play. And to that extent, we might say, not necessarily a conclusion, but we might say that policies to guarantee minimum prices of raw cashew nuts have worked quite well. However, only in cases where the quality of the additional raw cashew nuts produced and those harvested is maintained. If quality collapses, if you go back to 2019, we see the lower quality, much lower price. So let's take this and look at processing. So this is similar analysis. And people are going to say to me, Jim, a lot of processors in West Africa have high costs. I know that. What I've tried to do is to look at efficient processors. So the cost of processing taken in this analysis is based on actual processors. It's not based on an average of all the processors in West Africa or in Cote d'Ivoire or anywhere else. It's based on actual experience of some processors. And what we can see is that overall, the cost of buying and processing a cashew kernel from domestic production, and that would include Cambodia for the purpose of this, is lower this year than it has been at any time since March 2020. If we look then at the cost, so these bars are the cost of the average cost of cashew kernels processed in Vietnam. I've taken the cost of processing at about $200 per ton of raw cashew nuts. And then we compare that with the cost of processing imported. Now, again, imported raw cashew nuts are more expensive to process. But we see this gap, the cost of processing imported compared to the cost of processing domestic, greater now than last year or the later part of 2020 and higher again than 2019. If we look at the comparison, so we've taken efficient processors in Cote d'Ivoire, we've taken local raw cashew nuts, I've taken 450 CFA delivered, I've taken $450 a ton processing cost, which is higher than some but lower than most. But on average, I think it's about there for an efficient processor. And we see that overall, the cost of producing Ivorian cashew kernels with Ivorian raw cashew nuts is competitive. And then we compare it to the market. So first of all, we compare it to the average revenue achieved based on prices during these 4 periods for export. I took a 3-month forward position. And we add finally the prices for African kernels based on the same calculation. So in general terms, what we're looking at in these 4 periods is that the profit margin has been declining for processors. At the moment, when we look at this calculation, this is just not workable. Imported raw cashew nuts based on the current kernel price is not workable for Vietnamese processors, assuming they want to make money. And of course, they all want to make money. That's why they're in business. If we look at this situation, we see right now that Vietnamese processors can make money processing Vietnamese or Cambodian raw cashew nuts. They can make money. Ivorian processors can make money processing Ivorian cashew nuts, provided their process is efficient. But they can't make money in Vietnam processing imported raw cashew nuts. Now, there's a big question here. What, in that situation, why is the cashew kernel market so low? And I'm just wondering if really what's happened here is that this is an almost self-fulfilling prophecy, a kind of a vicious circle has developed. So we have to ask ourselves, did the Vietnamese cashew sector or cashew processors create this problem for themselves? They probably dropped raw cashew nut prices unnecessarily, probably in a panic situation at different times during last year, and it hasn't climbed back off that. Buyers, although they'd recognize good value, buyers tend not to chase markets when they're not moving. So if you offer $2.85 or $2.80 every day, the buyer is going to say, well, I'll pay $2.70. If you keep your price steady and low, which you may well do because you want to buy lower priced raw cashew nuts, then you're going to get into this situation, this contradiction. And what really happened here is that the international price of raw cashew nuts has not reacted to the kernel's price. And this has essentially cut out the profit margin on imported raw cashew nuts. So either one goes up or the other goes down. And based on the history and based on the historical position of pricing, it seems much more likely that the price of kernels would go up than the price of raw cashew nuts will go down. So let's have a look at the outlook. So we think that India and Vietnamese buyers will continue to buy carefully for the time being, but they cannot wait too long. There's a little bit more pressure on Indian buyers to buy at the moment than there would be on Vietnamese buyers. If we look at the crop in Vietnam and Cambodia put together, let's call the combined crop something like 750,000 tons, which I think is probably optimistic. That represents somewhere in the region of about 4 months processing. And we're at the end of month 1. If we consider voyage times, longer voyage times, more difficult voyage times. So it's pretty likely that the market will start to come to life. Kernels prices, we talk about this vicious circle. So buyers aren't buying because prices are not moving, and prices are not moving because buyers are not buying. And then you get sometimes a situation where there is a level of pent-up demand in the market, and the market springs to life. And then we start to talk again about volatility and why does this market move as quickly as it does. What can change this vicious circle? Well, some news in the market in terms of crops. Given the time of year, the most likely news is in terms of crops, but there's no real indication of any dramatic news in that respect. We could get a situation where buyers start to enter the market. So what we've often seen over many years is that 1 or 2 buyers start to act, time runs out. So there's news on the one side that can change it, and there's time on the other side. Simply, as the weeks go on, buyers need to make a move. And whilst Vietnamese processors are shipping their forward sales based on their domestic sourcing, they need to keep an eye on forward sales based on imported raw nuts. And as we've seen, unless Vietnamese processors want to lose money, something needs to happen in either sense. Kernels need to go up or RCN needs to come down. And it's not surprising in that environment that there would be a difficulty financing processing and new purchases, simply because if you're not making money, how do you justify borrowing money? If we look at freight, we see freight disruptions likely to continue. Long voyages, shortages of vessels, costs are beginning to rise in Africa on kernels. Nothing like the costs from Asia at the moment, but nonetheless, costs are beginning to rise. And that is having an impact and will continue to have an impact throughout the year. But we're looking at still probably 60-65% savings on West African freight versus freight from Vietnam, for example. Crop situation, I think the outlook is that I don't think there's any real major worry of shortage or major worry of poor crops, but the crops may be a little bit disappointing, particularly in Cambodia, Nigeria, possibly in India, certainly in Vietnam. Inventories are tightening. This is what I mean when I talk about time. And in the inventory situation now is a little bit more difficult to manage because voyages are unpredictable. So 90-day voyages on RCN to Vietnam, up to 120-day voyages for kernels back to markets in Europe or in North America. So it looks at the moment to me that if buyers come into the market, a lot of these low prices available in Vietnam will evaporate. Probably the premium for African kernels over Asian kernels would be somewhat eroded by that. The freight advantage, the quality advantage, traceability and so on will still remain in place, but some of that premium will be eroded. At that moment, it seems logical, although in Cashew's logic doesn't always rule, it would seem logical that offers for kernels would rise and the market would then come to life. When will that happen? It really should happen in April. It may drift into May, and that will depend on the overall situation in offtake in destination markets. So that's an outlook in the market, a little bit more price analysis than we would normally do. There are two things really I think we should take from this. First of all, we should regard the current situation as unusual and something that will change, and we should avoid making long-term decisions based on these short-term factors. Secondly, there is a more compelling argument now than ever before, looking at the numbers, looking at what's been achieved in West Africa on processing. There's a more compelling argument now for investment there than at any time in the past 10 years. So thank you very much indeed. If there's any questions, we're more than happy to answer those. But we're also going to chat to our guests.
Thank you very much, Jim Fitzpatrick, for this on-point explanation of the situation in the market today. Then there are a number of questions around the price comparisons, and I think it's mainly about differing opinion, whether the current situation really is to the benefit of processing in Africa vis-a-vis processing in Vietnam. Maybe if you go back to I tried to analyze these questions to also have an understanding of what I was getting. If you go back to the RCN price comparison, Vietnam, Cote d'Ivoire, maybe that would be right if you can show that slide so that we can. Hello, Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, precisely this one. Jim, what I'm getting is that probably whatever you're showing here as some kind of an advantage for local processing in, say, Cote d'Ivoire, it's only something peculiar to match. But if you look at the historical trend, it is a case that by April, it is already going to shoot up. And that's even already in March, we are having a level which is far higher than what we had in March of 2021, which shows that this situation could even get worse in April. Again, for the Vietnamese processor, having a much lower farm gate price in Vietnam, which is showing more a significant drop, should overall, in terms of the two factors, contribute to more profitable processing in Vietnam than Africa. If you can clarify that, I try to go through and then digest it in this way, but you can clarify things. And please, you can have your questions in the Q&A feature so that we can bring them up to you. So can you go ahead to this part?
I'm not sure I understood the question. If we look at the situation in processing and we consider the history, it is different now. I mean, one thing is for certain, that an efficient processing plant in West Africa, although it's overall operational cost may be higher than a similar operation in Vietnam, the difference in the overall cost of production is more than compensated for by the cost of moving the raw cashew nuts from the farm gate to a factory in Vietnam than it is by moving the raw material from a farm gate in West Africa to a factory which maybe is 50 or 100 miles away. There are a whole range of factors, not least freight, export duties, management of the stock, the margin for the trader, financing, which mean that this case here, and by the way, this chart is not intended as an advertisement for processing in West Africa. This chart is intended to show why Vietnamese buyers may be currently reluctant. There's no doubt that for years to come, Vietnam will be the dominant cashew processing country in international markets, but it is getting more difficult. And it does need a certain amount of rationalization. If I was to draw a conclusion from this chart, in terms of the questioner's comment, I think what I would say is that the key lesson is that if processing in West African countries, Cote d'Ivoire is the example on this chart, is efficient, then there's no reason why it can't also be highly successful and highly profitable. As I mentioned, I have taken $4.50 per ton of raw cashew nuts as the cost of the operational cost of processing for the purpose of this exercise. And for Vietnam, I've used a figure of $200 per ton. That's a difference of $2.50. So that would mean that as long as the cost of moving the product is more than $250, then you would say, yeah, processing in West Africa should actually be more profitable. And profit also needs to be considered in different ways these days. I mean, it also has to be considered not simply just in terms of money, but also in terms of impact, sustainability, and all of those aspects that the consumer wants. If we want people to eat this product, then we need to give them what they need. And what they need is quality, traceability, sustainability of the product. That's what they're demanding. If they don't get it, they won't buy it. So it's true in the past that the main problem of processing in West African countries has been controlling the cost and managing the process. That's changed. It's changed with the impact of semi-mechanized systems, and it's changed with the impact of simply better management, not to mention government supports. And for example, in this case of this analysis, the subsidies to processors in Cote d'Ivoire are not taken into account at all. So I think if I understand the question, is processing in Vietnam always likely to be more profitable than processing in West Africa? Absolutely not. For many it will be, but for many their operations in West African countries can be profitable. They do not need to match the cost, the operational cost of processing in Vietnam. They need to match the overall cost of producing the product. And that's the key thing. And when we look at the next slide, that was the purpose of that, to try and demonstrate that. Now, I know that these are quite complex subjects that we probably, in a normal environment, we would go through all of the details, the assumptions and so on to explain them. And perhaps someday we'll do that. But from what I'm taking from this is that presently, making money on imported raw nuts in Vietnam is tough, maybe impossible. That it is possible to make money on domestic raw nuts, both in Vietnam and in Cote d'Ivoire in this analysis. Ernest.
The second question, let me just read it. We understand that most of the large exporters in Vietnam are owned by the buyers. So is the 280, 290 price believable? Would it not be that the buyers are relocating the profits? So if the buyers are the same who own the processing, then they could be accounting differently. Maybe you can address that also, yes.
It's just not true.
Okay. So what is the real situation?
The real situation is that there are some processors owned by international companies. There are most processors owned by Vietnamese companies or Vietnamese individuals, that they're all pretty much in the same situation, that it's far more likely that cash is a high value commodity, and it's always possible that there's money moving around because it's an easy way to move large amounts of money. But I don't think that the current market situation is likely to be influenced by the illegal movement of money or transfer pricing. If you want to do transfer pricing, you should have a high price, not a low price.
All right, okay. And there's another one that just came in. How is the kernel consumption behaving in global markets? Is there a link between the Asean crop outlook and the kernel demand?
No, there's not. The RCN consumption generally has been quite good. We've seen record consumption in North America in 2021. We've seen record consumption in Europe. In each of the last 3 years, we've seen increasing imports in China. And we heard recently from a guest that the consumption in the Middle East is expected to increase in 2022 by about 15%, bringing it back to levels that were seen prior to the pandemic. So generally speaking, the consumption of cashew kernels has been very good. If you were with us 2 weeks ago, you will have seen the analysis of consumption and imports. Of course, we base consumption on imports because those are numbers that we can trust. And the general conclusion was that demand is very, very strong and likely to remain so, and that the underlying factors remain strong for demand. Is there a link between the raw cashew nut crop outlook and the kernel demand? Well, there may be a link in terms of the motivations of individual importers or roasters when they buy, but there's no link in terms of the consumer. The prices in supermarkets and the supply in supermarkets at the moment has been set long ago. The cashew nuts that are being delivered now were purchased months and months ago, if not longer. And the prices set do not react in the short term. So when you look at particularly countries that would be described as, let's say, having what they call modern retail. So if we take Europe and North America, between them about 40% of world demand, that's the way it works. If you take India, which is approaching 40% of world demand, I think it's about 38% or thereabouts. Yeah, it may well have more of an impact in India because prices may be more likely to change. But we haven't seen major changes in price. So I don't think, as we concluded 2 weeks ago, I don't think that the demand is impacted by the short-term RCN crop outlook. It will be impacted by the long-term trend. If there's a shortage or lower production over a number of years, prices will go up and that will impact demand. But not in the short term, not now, and you can't explain low kernels prices by saying that people are eating fewer cashews. You can only explain it by saying that the people who supply those organizations are buying fewer cashews for the time being. Ernest.
Thank you very much. The last one before you bring in your guests. I'm trying to find a way to rephrase it, but then it is more to find out by how much a 10% reduction in the crop in Cote d'Ivoire is likely to impact on the RCN prices across the West African region or even the whole production area in Africa. Because I think for the questioner, it really appears that you are looking at something in the range of about 10 to 20% drop in the volume for Cote d'Ivoire, maybe 10 to 15% drop in the volume for Cote d'Ivoire in terms of your projections. And then is worried whether indeed this will not affect prices globally, especially for processing.
Well, I think if we just take a look back at our thoughts on the overall world production. If we look at that and we consider a 10% drop in Côte d'Ivoire, let's say it's about 100,000 tons of raw cashew nuts lower. And I'm not saying that's going to happen or has happened. It may be a possibility. That's about 2.5% reduction in world production. Then on the other hand, we look at a better crop in India, probably better crops in Senegal, Guinea-Bissau, which may not have the same impact. But overall, even taking into account 10% reduction in Côte d'Ivoire, we're not going to see a major impact on the overall supply of raw cashew nuts throughout the year.
Okay, thank you very much. Jim, I think at this stage, you can bring in your guests, and then so that we hear from them in terms of what is going on in Benin and Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Well, we're joined by two really interesting guests. First of all, we have from Benin, we have Serge from Tularo Global. Serge and Tularo have a really interesting business model. They're successful processors. And I'm going to ask Serge about the situation in Benin and the situation as it looks for processors there. Evelyn Obadike is the Market Information Director of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. Nigeria has been an up-and-coming producer of cashew nuts and also a country where processing has been growing. And I'm going to ask Evelyn about the situation in Nigeria and the overall economic situation and how it might impact cashews. But coming first to Serge. Good morning, Serge. How are you?
Good morning.
Good morning. Serge, what is the situation from your point of view in Benin on the current crop?
Merci. Concernant la production actuelle, je pense que vous parlez de la production 2022 des noix de cajou. En réalité, au niveau du Bénin, ce n'est pas tellement différent de la sous-région et de l'actualité mondiale en termes de baisse de productivité. Toutefois, il faut dire qu'au niveau de Tularo, nous avons mis en place quand même depuis quelques années un mécanisme de suivi qui est associé à l'apiculture. C'est-à-dire, on tient beaucoup plus aujourd'hui nos indicateurs par rapport à l'apiculture que nous avons installés dans les champs témoins. Et il relève que 2022, en termes de productivité, est un peu trop bas. Parce qu'en termes de récolte apicole, nous sommes autour du tiers, ce qui est très inquiétant. Donc, voyant que cette récolte va souvent de pair avec la production de noix de cajou, alors on se dit que la production également tournera autour du tiers de la capacité nationale, ce qui est très inquiétant.
But Tularo has been really successful in recent years. I know it's been a long-term project and it's one that we've all watched with interest. How have you organized yourselves in terms of access to the supply chain, access to farmers?
Bon, au niveau de Tularo, c'est simple. Lorsqu'on essaie un peu aujourd'hui, on voit quand même que le Bénin a un très petit volume dans le volume mondial de noix. Mais contrairement aux autres, ça fait partie des rares endroits aujourd'hui au monde où on peut proposer quand même des noix organiques, biologiques. Ce qui fait qu'au niveau de Tularo, on s'est dit, vu qu'on ne peut pas faire la compétitivité en termes de quantité, alors faisons la compétitivité en termes de qualité. Et depuis quand même maintenant 8 ans, on travaille sur de forts réseaux de producteurs pour parvenir à 100% d'une transformation biologique au niveau de Tularo. C'est vrai que là, on est à peine à 40% par rapport à nos objectifs, la pandémie étant passée par là entre-temps. Mais vraiment, on s'est dit que ce sera le succès pour le Bénin et bon, en greffe également pour l'Afrique de l'Ouest.
How is the demand for organic cashew kernels? Are you seeing it growing?
Oui, on peut dire, sans aucun risque quand même de se tromper, qu'après le clash de 2018 qu'on a subi jusqu'en 2019, 20 et puis qui continue et qu'on est en train de gérer, il n'y a que l'organique qui soit resté stable. On a parlé tout à l'heure du conflit entre le coût de production et puis le prix d'achat des noix. Mais il faut dire qu'en termes d'organique, c'est resté vraiment stable et linéaire. Et la demande, elle est très croissante, mais il faut dire également que les contraintes font que c'est un peu difficile pour les uns et les autres de s'y mettre. Sinon, pour nous, c'est l'avenue de la noix au Bénin et en Afrique de l'Ouest.
That's really interesting. I think also we probably should say that organic or bio cashews is not the answer for everyone. It's technical, it's costly, and it takes time to implement. So for everyone to run into cashew production of organic kernels is probably not a very good idea. But Tularo has done a great job in that area. So what we're seeing is an example of a very successful company in quite a difficult trading environment, as Serge has outlined for us. But it is working because they've selected the right market and they've built a supply chain around that market. Let's talk to our other guest, Evelyn Obadike of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. Good morning, Evelyn.
Good morning, Jim.
How are you keeping? I'm well, thanks. I'm well. Tell us about, I know NEPC is a large government agency promoting export and particularly active in food and beverage. How do you see the future of the Nigerian food sector and particularly the development of the cashew sector in Nigeria?
Thank you, Jim. There is a very high prospect for development of the food sector in Nigeria, especially cashew kernels. One, we have the federal government through various institutions like the Federal Ministry of Agri. They are in partnership with the delegation of German industry and commerce in Nigeria, looking at both the plantation, increasing the number of plantations, and also the processing. And then Nigerian Export Promotion Council is also doing a lot. But before I say what NEPC is doing, I want to tell you that the construction giant, Julius Berger, has also entered into the processing of cashew kernel. And very soon, later in this second quarter, most probably, their processing facility will be coming upstream. We are talking about 5,400 metric tons. And they are saying there will be nothing that will be wasted in the value chain, and they are ready to support about 2,000 smallholder farmers. In terms of resources, Julius Berger have it. And this is going to be the height of Nigeria processing. Then you look at what NEPC is doing. What are the challenges? We can say maybe the major issues has been around the port. Now, the lead time it takes maybe for Nigeria, the exporters to export. The NEPC, through the federal government, through the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, has come up with a project, a PPP project called Domestic Export Warehouse. How does it work? The Domestic Export Warehouse is a PPP arrangement to ease up the identified supply chain constraints. Instead of having multiple agencies and multiple examinations before a container is shipped, now it will be one single documentation, one single inspection, and then the movement of such containers will be any container or trucks. The trucks conveying the product will be branded. So they will be branded, and they will have this port access into the port will be easing up. It will eliminate spending a longer number of days on the road. And like I said, cashew trucks will be accorded high priority in accessing the port. So you see that the lead time from the time of signing the export orders to eventual shipment is shortened. And that is a very, very good thing. Not only that, the trucks, the idea is that the trucks will be integrated in some places where it's possible with wagons, like we have in the Kaduna, and then with barges, like we have in Kirikiri and Ikorodu. So that's challenge most people are looking at in terms of port. The Nigerian Export Promotion Council and the federal government of Nigeria, through this initiative, is already solving it. And then coming about the certification, what has been the issue? Ignorance. But NEPC, through the different programs, we did a training program. We exposed a lot of cashew operators under what we call the Export Competency Development Program, which we had for about which you also involved 2.5 years or more. Some of them, so they got exposed. They knew that it is important for them to get some elements of critical certification. Guess what? Coming back after that training, some of them are HACCP certified, FDA certified, but more critically, last year, 2021, the federal government of Nigeria, under the Export EEFP program, Export Expansion Facility Program, is sponsoring 100 cashew farmers under the organic certification, because we want to make sure we get it right from the farm gate. And many other things, we're exposing them at Cashew Festival, Cashew Convention, African Cashew Alliance festivals, many other things. And then we have, in addition to that due, printed manuals, quality manuals. We are going through as different cashew associations to train them on handling, post-harvest handling practices. Let me stop here for the moment.
Thank you. I mean, I know a lot of raw cashew nut buyers will be very reassured if there was something to improve the handling and the speed of shipment through the port. That's a really critical factor at the moment. It's also encouraging to hear of further investment in processing in Nigeria. It's impressive, the information that you've been given us. So there's good news there for Kernels buyers who may find more qualified suppliers, and good news for RCN buyers who may find that the product moves through the port more quickly, which, by the way, is a major problem and has been a major problem for some years. I notice both of our guests have mentioned the importance of the supply chain. Serge talked about the organic supply chain and developing that, and how that's been done successfully by Tularo. Evelyn has spoken about the development of farmers in niche markets. Again, she mentioned organic production. But I would like to also again repeat that organic production is not something for everyone. It's complex, it's time consuming, and it's high investment. When we look at Nigeria, Evelyn Obadike, how important do you think the domestic consumption of cashew kernels can be in the country as a catalyst for the development of processing?
Yeah, thank you. A lot of awareness has been created. We see an increase in the demand for healthy diets, healthy snacks, and that has really created awareness and making the farmers even to look at planting new varieties. And then a lot of research has gone into it. So the demand is rising. And with that also has pulled up the increase in the number of plantations, coupled with government intervention. And that will also make it, it aligns very well with the increase in the processing of RCN. I want to tell you that one of the key thrusts of the present administration is value addition. Value addition. The government of Nigeria does not encourage export of raw, not only in cashew. We want to create jobs. You look at the population of Nigeria, and then you can see that it is better to create jobs through processing. And then a lot of mechanization also through the banks, development banks, Bank of Industry, Nexim Bank, they're all out to support the cashew processing sector. And that is what the government is encouraging. So we see that awareness has been created, leading to the increase in the number of plantations, and also it will lead to production, massive production. That was what brought Julius Berger and so many others, giants, are coming into the processing. And if we have such a giant like Julius Berger in the processing, of course, you know that everybody will want to increase his size of plantation to feed Julius Berger processing plant. Thank you.
Thank you. That's encouraging. It's also interesting to notice in Nigeria that there isn't a great deal of direct intervention in the sector by the government. There isn't a high level of regulation in terms of price controls or export taxes on RCN or on kernels. That the sector is being developed more or less by the building of awareness. And one of the key things in that, I think, as Evelyn has outlined, is the prospect of a strong domestic market. Let's go back to our other guest, Serge. Serge, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. Looking at, we know that Tularo has been a successful business. We know it's taken a long time to get to that level of success. What do you think are the key factors that have made your business in cashew processing successful when in that same period of time, so many others have fallen by the wayside or failed in their business?
Oui, pouvez-vous reprendre la question, s'il vous plaît?
Serge, what do you think has made Tularo a successful business in the cashew sector over the last 10 years? We've seen many factories fail, but yours has gone on to success. What do you think are the key factors that have made your business successful?
Merci, Jim. En réalité, c'est vrai que le mot succès par rapport à Tolaro, c'est un mot que je prends avec beaucoup de pincettes. Pourquoi? Parce que nous sommes encore au niveau de Tolaro, la tête sous l'eau. On se défend comme on peut. Donc, c'est vrai, on avance à petits coups, mais ce n'est pas encore le grand succès. Alors, ceci dit, pour nous, la clé par rapport à la transformation de l'acajou, c'est d'abord de réaliser ses propres faiblesses. Parce que on a un peu tendance à comparer la transformation de cajou aux autres transformations, ce qui est une grande erreur. Grande erreur en ce sens que le challenge au niveau de l'acajou, il est énorme. Le challenge, il est social, il est industriel, il est qualitatif et j'en passe. Alors, au niveau de Tolaro, on a juste essayé, selon le principe que on ne peut réunir les acteurs qu'autour de leurs intérêts. Alors, et producteurs, et nous, on s'est dit comment on va faire pour aller de l'avant. Et pour ça, on est allé rechercher les certifications qu'il faut, c'est-à-dire les validations qu'il faut. Parce que pour compétir sur le marché international, on ne peut pas le décréter. Et ces certifications, vous l'avez souligné tout à l'heure, sont un peu complexes. Mais on s'y est mis très tôt et jusqu'à l'heure, on y travaille. Et quand je parle de certification à l'international, je veux parler quand même BRC, les validations FDA et consorts. Et ça, c'est l'un des premiers challenges que nous avons relevés et que nous continuons de relever. Le deuxième challenge, c'est la valorisation du produit. C'est vrai que tous les pays le disent, Madame Evelyne l'a souligné tout à l'heure, qu'il faut ajouter de la valeur au produit, c'est vrai. Mais il faut ajouter quelle valeur au produit? Et là, nous, aujourd'hui, nous sommes passés de la transformation primaire à une transformation secondaire, c'est-à-dire en produit fini, purée, farine et consorts. Et également, nous avons commencé par mettre l'accent sur la consommation domestique. Parce qu'il faut faire du long terme, il faut vraiment avoir un marché sécurisé. Donc, au niveau de Tolaro, cette consommation domestique, on a commencé par y mettre l'accent, tant au Bénin, tant dans la sous-région. Donc, je peux dire, en gros, que le succès viendra de la définition de nos faiblesses et de travailler à relever les défis de ces faiblesses.
Serge, you've just given us a good description of how to overcome, how to manage, how to become a successful cashew processor. Let me tell our listeners that Tolaro Global is a very impressive business. And if you're interested in value-added cashew products, they're really interesting people to talk to. Merci beaucoup, Serge. Let me thank our other guest, Evelyn Obadike, of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council. And let me pass you back to Ernest.
Et puis, je vais donc repartir vers Ernest.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jim, and good morning again to Serge and Evelyn. There are some two questions here, actually, for both of you. The first one, which goes to Evelyn, it's more about the Nigerian cashew sector and what plans are being put in place by government to evolve structures to better regulate the sector and attract more private sector. I think here it's in reference to the fact that you also find in Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Ghana, and Guinea-Bissau and Tanzania, the fact that there are regulatory mechanisms and structures which are also contributing to the growth of the sector and what plans are there in the case of Nigeria? Thank you very much. And then later I'll ask the question for Serge also.
Thank you very much, Ernest. I think the allowing the forces of demand and supply to determine the price is a better way to attract investment into that sector than pegging a price. So that is what the government is doing. We allow forces of demand and supply to determine the price. That is an incentive. Even the presenter, Jim, mentioned it, that in Nigeria, there is nothing, we don't have the commodity, with the prices are not pegged for now. Thank you. But at least the government, federal government support in terms of having value addition as a priority. Priority is very, very important.
Donc la qualité est vraiment importante.
Thank you very much, Evelyn.
Je vous remercie.
And then the next question
Et puis
goes to Serge.
la question suivante est une question qui est adressée à Serge.
And the questioner wants to know
Et puis,
whether there are
savoir c'est s'il y a
price markups in organic cashew production,
des prix en termes
which
de
are sufficient enough.
Cajou.
Whether the price markup in organic cashew are sufficient enough to compensate for the cost of certification and organic cashew production by farmers.
La production de cajou
essentially the question is to find out, does it pay for the farmer to produce organic cashew?
Quel est le prix qui est payé aux producteurs?
Merci. Alors, par rapport à la production de noix organiques, tout le monde en sort gagnant. Et simplement parce que le prix organique pour les noix de cajou sont égales au prix du marché plus la prime bio. Alors, ce qui fait un peu la difficulté, c'est que lorsque vous certifiez des producteurs bio, vous avez désormais l'obligation d'acheter leur noix. Autrement, ils feraient le sacrifice pour rien.
Otherwise, the sacrifice, what we are sacrificing will be
2022, où les prix sont déjà autour de 500 sur le marché. Ça veut dire que nos producteurs bio prendront 500 plus la prime bio, qui est de 30 à 45 francs en fonction de ce qu'on y met. Donc, tout le temps, le producteur se gagne. Deuxième chose par rapport au bio, c'est que les producteurs bio sont toujours payés au prix le plus fort de la campagne. Ça veut dire quoi? Ça veut dire que aujourd'hui, les prix sont autour de 500 sur le marché. Si demain, les prix revenaient peut-être à 450 ou à 400, on les achèterait toujours à 500 plus la prime bio. Pourquoi? Parce que les producteurs ayant une obligation de garder le stock pour nous, on a également une obligation d'acheter ce stock pour renforcer la confiance entre producteurs et transformateurs. Merci.
Thank you very much, Serge. It's very clear, the explanation and the figures given also. I think finally it is more to find out how in your expectation, the crop is going to end in your respective countries. Jim has given an outlook and to expect from your different countries. But again, as you are here yourselves, what is the kind of outlook you have for the crop for this year? So maybe, Evelyn, you can start and then Sergio.
Répétez, s'il vous plaît. Please, can you repeat the question?
Yes, so what I'm saying is that we have heard from Jim what the outlook is like in the different countries, as well as yours. But then as you are here yourselves and also looking at the issues on the ground, what are your views in terms of the outlook for this year for the raw cashew nut production and export in your countries?
Thank you very much. The outlook for Nigeria in the cashew sector is going to be very, very bright. Like I said, and very bright, very profiting. Like I said, a lot of awareness have been created, and that is making the RCN, of course, RCN, of course, there is available. And then we are going to see a lot of processing, the level of kernels increasing, the level of kernels available increasing. And what does that mean? With the certification NEPC is driving at the moment, we are going very soon, in the few years to come, we are going to see a lot of certified products, a lot of certified processes. And that will mean higher value for especially kernels coming out from Nigeria, because the value will be high, the quality will be high with those certifications. And we see a lot of importers changing and coming back to import from Nigeria.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Now, Serge, your view in terms of how it's going to go this year in Benin.
Oui, merci. D'abord, il faut dire que au Bénin, il y a une grande volonté, tant des acteurs, tant de l'État, pour renforcer la transformation en général. Mais ceci dit, sans vouloir être un peu alarmiste, moi je reste très inquiet en ce sens que tant qu'on ne fera pas de l'acajou un sujet de convergence de tous les acteurs et qu'on va rester diversifié, ce sera un peu difficile. Et aujourd'hui, ce que nous projetons à l'horizon, c'est vraiment de rentrer dans cette transformation circulaire où on doit travailler sur tout ce qui est dérivé de cajou, ce que nous avons déjà commencé. Mais de là à l'imposer à tout le monde, vous le savez, ce sera un peu compliqué. Donc, nous restons aujourd'hui au niveau de Tolao en termes de perspective en disant le marché va se réguler lui-même. C'est-à-dire ce sera juste une question de temps. On va faire peut-être beaucoup d'erreurs, on va faire beaucoup de chutes, mais à la fin, le marché, la transformation va donner les réponses à sa propre résolution. Mais ce sera une question de temps. Donc, nous voulons rester optimistes, mais les réalités quand même sont là et indéniables. Merci.
Thank you very much, Serge. Now I see two hands up. Isaac Ojonugwa, and then Munira. Any of you who is ready, you can. Kindly, you have been asked to unmute your mics. So Isaac, I see you are ready. Please, your question.
Yeah, I want to appreciate you on this program. Isaac Ojonugwa is my name from Nigeria, National Cashew Association of Nigeria.
Okay, it looks as if we may have lost Ernest for the moment.
We have Jim. Hello, Jim.
Yes.
Hello, Jim.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please go ahead. We can hear you, Isaac.
Okay. We are quite interested about this program. And as a member of the Cashew Association of Nigeria, quite a number of investors are ready to invest in processing. I want to see how all hands can be on deck to assist people that are processing kernels, even the apple, cashew apples, so that we can be able to create value in the cashew industry in Nigeria. And want to see what are those challenges. What are those challenges that may inhibit these processors from Nigeria so that our products from Nigeria will not be rejected by the international community? That is my question. I've already written something in the question and answer session. So that is my question.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for the question, but the interpretation was not working there.
Okay. Okay.
So Jim, hello, Isaac. I think we have your question and that is clear. We will take also from Munira, and then when we have Munira's question, we will let the guest of Jim address this. So Munira, are you also ready? So thank you, Isaac.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My English is not too good, and my French
no problem,
also.
Please go ahead.
I prefer speak in Portuguese or in Spanish. I don't know if it's possible.
Let's go ahead, please.
Hello?
Go ahead, but if you can manage with a little English also, that's fine.
In this case, I will try to speak in French. Bonjour.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Je suis de la Guinée-Bissau. J'ai été dans le cajou, ça fait presque 40 ans déjà. Mais dans le secteur empresarial, je suis déjà 30 ans. Quand j'étais comme administratif public, et je me rappelle que la Banque mondiale et le Fonds monétaire avaient mis une condition que dans le 2000, c'est la dernière année que la Guinée-Bissau pourrait exporter le cajou en nature. Nous, on a commencé avec le cajou très peu, 200-300 tonnes. Aujourd'hui, nous exportons 230 000 tonnes. Mais ça m'inquiète que la communauté internationale ne peut pas penser dans la transformation locale de nos cajous. Le cajou de la Guinée-Bissau, comme vous le saviez très bien, c'est un cajou très bonne qualité. Nous aussi, nous sommes dans la contre-saison. Parfois, je me demande si c'est à cause de ça que les gens ne préfèrent pas que la Guinée-Bissau fait la transformation parce que notre cajou, c'est l'équilibre pour la qualité des autres cajous. Mais je vous demande, les gens qui sont dans la tête de la décision, il faut penser dans le cajou de la Guinée-Bissau, surtout aujourd'hui, où on a seulement qu'un entrepreneur qui fait le transport maritime de cajou. Avec la COVID, la situation était catastrophique et elle est toujours catastrophique. On a les crobes de l'année passée, pas mal de stocks. Ça va affecter fortement les cajous prochaines, que on pense que va être un bon crop. Autre aspect que j'écoutais avec plaisir que les gens font au Nigeria, mais qu'il faut aussi qu'on pense ça en Guinée-Bissau, de donner l'appui à la population rurale. Aussi, je sais que beaucoup de choses que je parle ici, c'est pas de votre responsabilité, mais je veux le mettre dans la table parce que c'est même mes gouvernants écoutent que savent que nous les gens qui sommes dans le secteur de cajou, on reconnaît notre problème et on souffre avec ça. Aujourd'hui même, j'ai fait les promenades dans toute la brousse de la Guinée-Bissau. Je vois qu'il y a des majorités des arbres qui sont malades et qui sont vieux. Qu'il faut faire quelque chose pour ça. Et aussi, je vois que si on pense dans le domaine de la transformation, dans certaines zones, ça sera quelque chose de profitable de côté empresarial et côté social. On a beaucoup de main-d'œuvre qui n'ont rien à faire. Je ne peux pas croire que Vietnam peut avoir une transformation moins chère que la Guinée-Bissau, par exemple.
Merci, Madame Muniru.
Thank you. Il faut que...
Yeah, we have very much understood the issues you have raised. And I think it is very clear, as you say, that the situation in particularly Guinea-Bissau gets a lot worse. We have been there. I have also been there not long ago and seen all the aging trees, even the issue of diseases. There are a lot of the trees that are also getting diseased, and there is an urgent need for some support in there. And it is important to note that there are also development partners who are joining this webinar, and the Lift Cashew project by the USDA is also in that region, and they are on this call, and we believe that they will take it up. We also know there are new initiatives coming up. Move from GIZ may also have that area as part of the operational area, and we expect that some effort to be put in. But I will take out a bit of what Madame Muniru said and ask Jim also to confirm the profitability of processing in Guinea-Bissau, because prior to COVID and also during COVID, we realized it was only one factory that was operational there, that was Array, and all the other factories had collapsed. What exactly is happening beyond the normal issues that we find in the other parts of West Africa? And then when you are done, I will also want Serge, and so Serge, Evelyn, to address the issue of Isaac, who is talking more about direct support for the establishment of cashew processing in Nigeria, and how can they be assisted also with best technologies that can meet market expectations in Europe. So I think these are the two questions that I take from the last two interventions. So Jim, maybe you can start, and then we invite Evelyn in.
Okay, well, it is clear that Guinea-Bissau has a problem. Long time a major producer of high quality cashew nuts, and now a situation where Aging trees that were originally planted too close together need to be rehabilitated. There are ways to do that. We've seen that done elsewhere. And I think that there are a number of interventions either in progress now, some very impressive ones, and some on the way that will address that. But it does need to be addressed because the production of cashews is an essential element of food security and general well-being in Guinea-Bissau. With regard to processing in Guinea-Bissau, I think it's complex because, first of all, you have a good production of a high-quality raw material that's in very high demand. That means that competition is strong for that raw material. Secondly, the fact that it comes towards the end of the season actually can often mean that competition for the raw material is much stronger than if that raw material were arriving, let's say, like Côte d'Ivoire or Ghana, right in the middle of the general regional harvest season. So that can actually increase the competition and make life more difficult for processors. I think also that when we look at the quality and the characteristics of the raw material, it has some really ideal characteristics for processing, and that Indian processors generally have made a success of that. So it may be that the application of technology to processing in Guinea-Bissau is more difficult than it is in other countries for the reasons of the quality of the raw material. Although it is good quality raw material, no doubt, it has certain slightly different characteristics. And also due to the scale. If production is 230,000 tons, to build mechanized processing units, they should be really more than 5,000 tons capacity, ideally 10,000 tons or more. And that's quite difficult. It is quite difficult to encourage investment, given the reputation and the potential lack of political stability in the country. So now processing is generally about larger units, larger investment. And it's difficult to attract that kind of investment when there are, let's say, so many other countries in the cashew sector competing for that investment, and when the situation in Guinea-Bissau is far from ideal. So I think these are factors that need to be taken into account. And I think that initially the first priority should be to rehabilitate trees, improve growing conditions, and also perhaps to look at the way the supply chain works. It's highly regulated. Not all of the regulation is effective. The regulatory environment is quite volatile. And that really needs to be carefully assessed. I think also that the point raised about freight is important. It is a key issue that Bissau Port is not a particularly efficient port, and that shipping lines have now showed that by effectively withdrawing from services from there. So for me, improving production, even sustaining the current level of production would be the priority. And from there then developing a value chain which ultimately follows with cashew processing. But large-scale cashew processing is going to be difficult to attract in the current security, political, and general situation in the country. And that really is the formula for development of investment in cashew processing. Ernest.
Thank you, Jim. And Evelyn, just 1 minute to respond to Isaac's question in terms of support for processing, and also, more importantly, introducing new technologies for processing.
Yes, thank you very much for Isaac.
Just 1 minute.
Yes.
Very good. Please go ahead.
Nigerian Export Promotion Council supports processing of cashew from RCN to cashew kernels. And we do a lot of capacity building. We do like what I said about the certification. They are registered exporters. He should come, and they are known for cocoa. And if they're diversifying into cashew, it will come, and it's on our website. He can get and some form of under the EEFP that was launched last year, a lot of processing facilities were also encouraged. I don't know if they are applied. So he should come to NEPC. He can get the training, the capacity building is there. The certification they give, they have the farmers, the smallholder farmers, they can get involved in the organic if they are interested, other certifications. And also, I know that the banks are also willing, if you have a good processing facility, the Nexim Bank, as well as the Bank of Industry, they have a window for cashew, designated for cashew processing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. Thank you, Sedge. And thanks so much, Jim Fitzpatrick. And our appreciation also goes to our participants who have been with us. And at this point, I just will give Jim 30 seconds to tell us what to look out for in the next fortnight, and then hand you over to Blessing, my co-facilitator.
Over the next fortnight, and we'll be back with you on the 13th of April, look out for activity on raw cashew nut buying from international traders. Look out at farm gate prices, particularly in the major producing countries, and look out for the situation in Benin as the season should open and we should start to get some trade there. I think this market can come to life quite quickly. Maybe it's in April.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And Blessing, you can take over from here.
Thank you very much, Ernest and Jim, for another session of the ACA Global Markets Encounter. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you also for joining us. The next session will be held on the 13th of April, 2022. That is 2 Wednesdays from today. We would also like to inform us all that the ACA 16th Annual Cashew Conference is coming up this year in Abuja, Nigeria, from the 12th to the 16th of September 2022. To all our partners and sponsors who have made it possible for us to continue bringing to you the ACA Global Market Encounter, we thank you all and we say stay safe till we see you on the 13th of April. Bye-bye.
What do you care most when buying color sorters? What makes better sorting performance? What ensures high stability and reliability regardless of 1 unit or 10,000 units? Quality is all. What do you care most when buying color sorters? What makes better sorting performance? What ensures high stability and reliability regardless of 1 unit or 10,000 units? Quality is all.